It's nice to see so many familiar faces from my nude swimming forays. That's a topical joke. It gets so much worse. No, thank you so much for the opportunity, Duncan, and Progress Alberta. And Melanie, thank you so much for that presentation. I'm just sitting back there chatting with some people. I think that was really insightful in terms of framing where we go. Here's what I want to do with my 15 minutes. Usually I would pontificate for the first 20. But here's what I want to do. I want to quickly go through a couple of themes over the course of the next 15 minutes. The first thing I want to do is talk about Jason Kenney. Elephant in the room in many ways. I want to talk to you about how I define him, not necessarily in a political sense, but I want to talk to you about how he should be defined in our minds as progressive organizers in this city going forward.
A racist.
Okay, so second, I shouldn't see if anyone else wants to react to that, and then I'll move on. The second thing I want to do is I want to talk to you about some of the lessons that we learned from the Nenshi campaign, and not just the normative lessons, but some of the interesting things that are going to be significantly residual in our politics going forward. From there, I'll talk about why I think progressives can win, what some of our challenges are, and frankly, some of the solutions going forward. But it all starts with this thesis statement. We can win in 2019, period. I foundationally believe that. But before we kind of get into why, I want to talk about Jason Kenney. And I want to talk to him in a way that we may not have talked about him before. We mention it as a side note, we mention it as a footnote, but the way I see Jason Kenney is this. And to understand our opponent, we need to respect our opponent. This guy's hardworking. He's hardworking as shit. Like, I'm not just trying to, he has a work ethic that's unbelievable. You ask anyone in politics, you'll say, who's one of the hardest working people in politics? Jason Kenney. One of the hardest working people. He's organized. He's done this for years. He was a strategist before he was a candidate, before he became leader. We need to understand that. He's scalable. He has created several people in the same vein as him, with a hard work ethic, with an ability to organize, with a keen understanding of data, and with a keen understanding of hand-to-hand combat. He's scalable. He's got a strong license to advocate. You go downtown in some of these office towers and you say you're voting for Jason Kenney, no one bats an eye. Try doing that with Rachel Notley. We don't have that license to advocate yet. He does. That's who he is. And finally, he's really good at throwing up trial balloons that seem extreme, but moderating them back to the media, which perpetuates the fact that people are making him out to be a larger boogeyman than he is. So there is a way to define Jason Kenney that is not the guy that's trying to out gay kids, but for us, as progressive people who want to see a progressive party win in 2019, we need to respect thy opponent, and that's how I see Jason Kenney. Let me take a little bit of a detour and talk to you about some of the elements that we saw during the 2017 municipal with the Nenshi campaign. And I'll go through 3 or 4 of these, and I'm not the most well-positioned person to talk about this. So in the breakout sessions, there's some of our campaign folks here. I'll point them out to you. You should talk to people about this if you're interested in some of these topics. The first thing I'll talk about are bots and trolls. How many people know what bots and trolls are? Okay, so online fake accounts, online troll accounts designed to create a haze on social media. But that's not where it stops. In fact, that's just where it starts. Because the real purpose of bots is to extend something called the Overton window. How many people are familiar with this concept? Okay, so for those who are not, the Overton window is this academic concept that talks about what is applicable and what is allowable in discourse and discussion. And when you look at bots and trolls, what we saw in the 2017 election is that they had particular dog whistle words that they tried to inject into social media and then thereby inject into the media. Let me give you an example. If you would have come to Calgary in, let's say, June, and you would have asked a person on the street, define Naheed Nenshi for me. Define Naheed Nenshi. Okay, smart guy, some people might say, kind of prickly, you know, he's intelligent. You come back in October, and I tell you 9 out of 10 people would use one word to describe him: arrogant. Do you know where that started from? That started from social media. That started on a particular day where a whole bunch of bots and trolls threw out that word. It got picked up by the mainstream, and they got picked up by other candidates, and now it's normative. We talk about it like it's fact. These bots and trolls are designed to create a haze, and they're designed to create emotional sort of overtures, but they're also designed to make words, phrases, context mainstream and applicable and frankly fact going forward. That's number one. Number two, polls are no longer strategic. They are now weaponized. We all understand this point, do we not? Right? And this is not an isolated incident. This will happen again. I'm looking forward to it happening in the Ontario election. It will happen. When you are able to say, this is where the race stands, everyone knows it's total horseshit, right? But then they give you airtime to justify why the polls are there. It allows you to move the needle. You do not need to be right today. You need to be right at the end, right? So if I tell you today that Rachel Nutley's up 9, and I'm a pollster, Zane's polling company, and they give me all the airtime in the world, I can go and justify why Rachel Nutley's up 9. They give me all the airtime in the world to say, and because Jason Kenney's this, and because the Alberta Party isn't that. They give me all the time to do it because I only need to be right on election day, right? This is going to be a part of our reality going forward. Our local media is eroding fast. We know that, right? We know that newsrooms are no longer what they used to be, but the flip side to this is that opinion and editorial coverage is now going to drive it. So what we saw in the municipal election, you don't have a newsroom, that's fine. Let's just get our opinion columnists to write the narrative of the race. That doesn't help when your largest news outlet is Post-Media. We're going to have to deal with that. Mobilization of supporters isn't an end goal, it's a process. We use GOTV to drive people to the polls. We need to start using GOTV in between elections to create more advocates. GOTV needs to be a continuous process. We need to use our network to create more of us, not just find more of us to just mark an X. We need this room to be twice the size, and then 4 times the size. And finally, big money will do the dirty work. It wasn't sophisticated in 2017 because they didn't know how to use media. They used billboards and really shitty TV ads. But what I do know is that you can keep your powder dry as the opponent and have the PACs do the dirty work for you. And this will be a reality going forward. So I just wanted to take a quick detour and talk to you about some of the Nenshi campaign stuff. So despite all that, despite the fact that I think Jason Kenney has all these admirable qualities, despite the fact that these are some of the headwinds we're facing, why am I optimistic? Well, here's why I think we can win in 2019. Number one, 40% of us are visible minorities in our major population centers, Edmonton, Calgary. Surprise, we're here. Feels like an awkward. So I am brown. But there's a point to this. First generation and second generation visible minorities do not, don't get me wrong, they're not in the bag, right? They're not in the bag for progressive parties. But what they are also not is they also do not have a historical voting pattern that they just feel like they have to follow because it's rote. That's an opportunity. We're young. Duncan mentioned this. Young, educated, something called the echo boomer generation. The kids are the boomers. We're here, and despite the economic downturn, there's still a growth in this population set. We are from away. The term native Calderian is hard to find. You might find it in this room with a couple of people, right? Hands up here, hands up here. A few. Okay, I'm not going to go one by one now. But yes, a lot of us are from away with the same thing. International migration plus intra-provincial migration means that once again, we just don't come here and mark X on PC or UPC because that's what we've been told to do. We actually are not tethered to any of those behaviors that we feel like the rest of the population might be. We underestimate how progressive our neighbors are. I see Brian Singer, who's our pollster on the Nenshi campaign. Brian runs something called the neighbors question. I'm going to butcher this, so talk to Brian about it afterwards. But ultimately, when you ask someone, 3 houses, right? You ask one person, what do you think your neighbor's voting? Conservative. You ask the second house, what do you think your neighbor's voting? Conservative. You ask that middle house who you are. Well, I'm progressive, but my neighbor's conservative. But the other guy's conservative. We underestimate how progressive we are because we live in our own silos. And when we find out that you think that your neighbor is conservative and they think the same about you, but you're both voting progressively, that is an untapped potential for us. And finally, we're steering in the right direction of the historical skid. Trump was a reaction to an increasingly progressive society. So was Brexit. Let's not make that mistake. We are headed in the right direction with a historical timeline that is heading significantly more progressive. And we also have a foothold on some of the tactics in the platform, and I feel for a short time on digital, where a lot of the consumer and the voter attention is, for a short amount of time, I think we have an advantage there. That's another reason. But there's significant challenges. We've historically sucked at value-based arguments. We've been the parties of empirical facts. I tell you something, you don't agree with it, I'm like, here's the facts, here's my footnotes, and you're like, I don't care. I don't care, right? We are emotional beings. We make emotional decisions and rationalize them with logic afterwards. Progressive parties have sucked at this. That's a challenge we have. Similar to we're losing the facts in emotion-based argument. We know the world is heading into more emotionally based arguments, and we're coming in with facts. Now, where do we do with that? I don't think we give away the empirical data. I don't think we give away the fact-based argument, but how do we compete in this world? This is the world we have to compete in. Thirdly, vote splitting. I will stand here and say that I do not know which of the parties I'm going to vote for in 2019. Quite simply. So I will equivocate. I will say that the Alberta Party and the NDP have an opportunity. I know that was not the tone of the previous two speakers, but vote splitting in either direction is a concern. It's something we're going to have to contest. We do not have the social license to advocate. Not as strongly. This was a big struggle for us in the Nenshi campaign. I see my fellow campaigners saying this. It was not until the 11th and 3/4 hour that people were like, oh yeah, I'll vote for not, and I'll tell people in my social network. Right now, how uncomfortable is it, just be honest with me, as Calgarians, to go out, and if you're not part of like, in the trenches of a party, but it isn't uncomfortable for many people to say, this is where I stand and I'm willing to tell people that. We haven't built the critical mass and that social license to advocate yet. And frankly, we lack a clear message on what we're doing right. We're really good at attacking the other side, but in terms of pointing out what we're doing right and what is right and how do we present a benefit-related platform, I felt like that's been a challenge. So here's some solutions. Women. Women is a massive, not just political voting bloc, but as progressives, women generally tend to vote more progressively, but we also need to ensure, and this is just fact, and you can talk to Brian about this afterwards, in our province, women have a significantly greater ability to, and a significantly greater depth than men, and to a statistically significant degree of their social networks. So when I'm talking about license to advocate, I'm talking about finding people who can create more of us. The key to unlocking that is reaching out to women. Young women, women in urban centers, middle-aged women. This is going to be key.
Old women too.
Older women too, of course. I'll mention every demographic except old women. Young women, middle-aged women, older women. We need to create an engagement ladder. We need to figure out how we get people on, not to this level, we want them to be at this level, where they're engaged, when there's a Cavs and Raptors game, Brendan, and people are standing here and sitting here. But we need to figure out what the first step to that looks like. We need to create a legitimate engagement ladder for people to show up and say, you're accepted, here's the first thing you can do. Here's the second thing you can do. And finally, can we just be nice to everyone? Like seriously, I'm not being facetious about this point. In fact, if there was one point that I want to highlight, it's this one. The UCP are not our enemies. They're our neighbors, they're our friends, they're people that we know. Let's not allow the anxiety and the vitriol of social media to define how we relate to people on a day-to-day basis. Because, let me tell you something, I don't know if Melanie will agree with this, she may not, but what we have in 2019 is an Alberta party that people don't know about, a UCP that did not exist, and an NDP that many people felt like they voted in revolt. We've got three parties that many people will consider to be, you know, three interchangeable brands that they haven't necessarily attributed themselves with or attached themselves with. So can we just be nice to everyone? Because we know that the cookie may crumble either way, and we will need people. We will need a mass of people to support us in whichever political movement moves forward. I think this is a huge point. We can't let this polarized vitriol dictate how we conduct ourselves day to day. We need to create on-ramps. The 11th hour is not too late to join. You know, we have to let go of the purity test. We have to let go of the historical baggage. We have to let go of, oh, I've never seen you at the previous XYZ before. Who cares? I'm here now. Right? We need every single person as possible. Creating barriers for that, we need to create on-ramps for that so that that's a smooth transition. It's a welcoming transition that people are allowed to and feel like they're in place. We need to fortify the middle. We need to figure out what the middle is. We need to figure out how the left of center captures it. And we need to figure out that progressives in some way capture the middle over the UCP. And finally, I'll leave you with this. We need to embrace the underdog status. We've got an incumbent progressive government. We've got an incumbent federal progressive government. We've got a mayor in Calgary that's progressive. We've got a mayor in Edmonton that's progressive. And we're the underdog? Yeah, I will take that bet. Because being the underdog and having powers of incumbency, being the underdog and having people bet against you is not a liability, it's an asset, and I think we need to embrace it. So I'll leave this there. Thank you.
Hey.